It is a pleasure to welcome everybody, and especially to welcome our two speakers just back from the General Assembly. Well, actually, Terry was at the Assembly virtually. So Terry Newland is our Bridge Executive Presbyter. He may say a word about that. I first knew him when he was our Synod Executive, and has been called out of retirement to fill the gap, and we're grateful for that. I really enjoyed your sermon at the last Presbytery meeting, so thank you for bringing that. And A.C. Acer, who is one of our own, who was I always call them youth advisory delegates. I guess it's young adult advisory delegate now. And she will talk a little bit about her experience there as a YAD. I've only been as a commissioner once. I was a commissioner to the 2016 assembly out in Portland, but I've gone to about more than half of the assembly since I've been a pastor. And I know John Larson used to go to every one of them, right? Something to look forward to every summer or every other summer. That was vacation. Okay. Yeah. Well, welcome. Why don't we have you come on up, and how are you all going to do this? Going to just stand and talk without a podium or anything like that? Yeah. Here you go.
All right. Yes, I'm Terry, and AC, one of yours. We haven't coordinated this, so we don't exactly know how it's going to roll out. But I wanted to get started. How many besides the Larsons and Guy have been to General Assembly? Oh, a couple. All right. So I know you can't tell because I have no hint of an accent that I'm a child of the Southern Church. And by that, I tell you that because I believe presbyteries run the church, run the denomination. And presbyteries charter congregations, and they ordain teaching elders, preachers, and congregations. And then beyond the presbytery, you send commissioners to synod, and you send commissioners to General Assembly. And so synod is a gathering of the regional presbyteries to decide what they want to do together. And General Assembly is all the presbyteries coming together and deciding who we are as a denomination. But it's presbyteries. And so it's very important. We get that because of we like small government in the South, and we've held on to that in reunion. So General Assembly is a gathering of the presbyteries. You send commissioners, somewhat like the Congress. You send commissioners based on the number of Presbyterians you have in your presbytery. You get to send 2 teaching elders and 2 ruling elders. The teaching elders were Aaron Houghton Angel and Jane Herring. Jane is at Emmanuel here in Nashville, and Aaron is at Allard. Is that how you say it? Allard. And then Judy Venable from Fayetteville is a ruling elder, and Carol Foster from, where's Carol? Carol's from Fayetteville, and Judy's from Calvary in Big Lick. That were the ruling elders. And then you also sent a young adult advisory delegate. We used to call them YADs. Since there's 2 ways in it now, young adult advisory delegate. I like to say YADs because I'm Southern again. But the young adult advisory delegates are invited from every presbytery. AC told me 84 came. I wish there'd been 100. I think last count I had was 166 presbyteries. I wish there were 166 young adult advisory delegates there. They get to vote and speak in committee, and they get voice on the floor of the General Assembly. And then you also had John Smith, the teaching elder that went as a volunteer he's a chaplain in the reserve, and so he was a support for the chaplain structure. And also, because Presbyterians apparently need technical assistance, he was a volunteer at the technical assistance desk. And then he was elected to the board of chaplains of the denomination, so he was there. All right. As I said, General Assembly comes together to deal with the business. The business comes from presbyteries. Presbyteries send overtures, motions, basically. They deal with reports from and resolutions from denominational agencies and staff, and commissioner resolutions. Commissioner resolutions is you have a short period, a window, if you're a commissioner, to turn in a recommendation. It has to be, someone else has to sign it with you, another commissioner, and then it's assigned to committee. Okay, all this business goes to committees. We're Presbyterian, we do committees. Nothing comes to the floor without a recommendation. Can you imagine a motion hitting the floor with nowhere to start? There was 156 commissioners, I believe, and 84 youth advisory delegates, young adult advisory delegates, and then there's some theological students and missionary delegates and ecumenical. So committees take all the businesses sent out to the committees. They met this year. Everybody's trying to recover from COVID, where everything was Zoom. This year, the committees met by Zoom before they got to Salt Lake City and came up with their recommendations. And then everybody showed up in Salt Lake City Saturday. And the rest of us did it by Zoom. So then all those recommendations from the committees hit the floor, and the commissioners debated, delegates, advisory delegates debated, and then the commissioners voted. I don't know if you have any particular issues that you are following or were interested about. We can take some time later on to answer those questions, but you got to hear from the child of your congregation and determine whether you fulfilled her baptismal vows, your vow to her in baptism, and raised her in the faith and nurtured her correctly. And apparently you have. She's been elected as an advisory delegate to the General Assembly, so you should congratulate yourselves. You did a great job. But AC, you want to tell them what your experience was as
I can do that.
In the minority age-wise at General Assembly?
A little bit, yeah. So all of the young adults, all of the YADs went out last Friday. We met and we had a couple days just to ourselves in Salt Lake for training, just to orient ourselves with the practices and things. Before we went out, we had 3 or 4 days of Zoom meetings with our committees. So I sat in my house on Zoom for 9 hours a day, discussing committees and bills and overtures and all kinds of things. And then we got out to Salt Lake City Friday, had our trainings. Everyone else came on Saturday. And our meetings began Sunday night. Our first plenary session opened Sunday night with worship, and we started by electing our co-moderators for the assembly. There were 2 kind of ballots of people running for co-moderators, and their role was to not only moderate the General Assembly and kind of make sure we all get to speak, but they're also going to be serving for the next 2 years until the next General Assembly. And they will go out across the country and across the world, just talk about the General Assembly, about the Presbyterian Church, and fulfill their roles as moderators for us. So we elected Cece and Tony, and they are both South Carolina pastors who we've seen at Montreat and kind of everywhere and beyond, and they are fantastic and have already done a great job. One bill that we passed this week changed the way that we elect moderators, so we will now be electing them at the end of a General Assembly, so they get to serve twice as moderators, which they have mixed feelings about, but I think they're excited still, and they're going to do a fantastic job as moderators for the next few years. They'll probably stop by Middle Tennessee or Westminster at some point, so if they do, definitely come out and see them because they're fantastic. Otherwise, we just spent a lot of time in a ballroom in the Salt Palace Convention Center discussing overtures and recommendations from committees. Oftentimes, things on the floor did kind of fall in the way that their committees recommended them, but there were some bills that got amended and discussed all day long. There was one morning that we met at 8 a.m. and we worked on one bill until probably 2 in the afternoon. So it was a long day, but it was good work that we were doing. I really enjoyed being a young adult advisory delegate because I got to voice opinions in committee and I got to vote on things and feel like I was making a difference there. But then once we transitioned to our plenary in Salt Lake City, we no longer had a vote on the floor. We just had kind of an advisory thing. So we could go up and speak as much as we wished to or as much as we were called on to do. And then all of the advisory delegates would vote. So it would show all of the results from what the young adults thought, what the theological seminary students thought, what the mission advisory delegates thought, and what the ecumenical advisory delegates thought. And that would advise all of our commissioners. So there were about 80, give or take, YADs, about 15 of each other group. And then commissioners, there were over 400. So their vote was oftentimes pretty swayed by what we thought. And so if we all leaned one way, they generally all leaned that way. The votes were never completely different. So whether or not they were influenced by us or maybe they just thought the same, it was nice to feel like we were influencing in some way or another. But yeah, I don't have much else. I didn't really prepare much for this, but questions, Chris Sheridan? They ranged kind of all over the place. There were, the one that we talked about a lot of the morning was Polity 01, and that was about how we are installing and ordaining our pastors. And so the questions we ask them, the beliefs we ask them to reflect in the church, and things like that. And so we kind of go back and forth on just really particular wording on things like that. So we are writing amendments to the Book of Order, if you're familiar with the Book of Order. And so we would go back and forth, and sometimes people would write a whole new amendment, so a whole new set of sentences to put in for an ordination practice, and sometimes people would take it out. Sometimes someone would go up to the mic and be like, that was the wrong form of there, or they would just kind of change a grammatical thing, and that was always kind of slowed down the process, but was important so that our book reads well and people can understand what we were trying to get done. So that's what we spent a lot of our time on. I was on the Environmental and Climate Justice Committee. And so the bill that we brought to the floor was about the church's divestment in fossil fuels. And so that was another one that was discussed for a long time and amended, and it ended up not passing, but we passed another bill that kind of just urges the church to divest and begin thinking about cleaner energy, just so that we can have a planet in the next 30 years. And then there were more kind of low stakes things, things that in committee passed unanimously, all just went on one big consent agenda that we passed at the beginning of the assembly. So we didn't see a bulk of the bills because they were pretty much going to be things that we were all going to agree on. But yeah. Yep. There were changes to the Book of Order. I believe they will begin at the start of the next General Assembly is when they get, I think it's all.
Yes, anything that's a change to the Constitution, it's like a U.S. Constitution. It has to go out to the presbyteries and have a majority of the presbyteries vote yes or ratify, or whatever term you want to use, approve the amendment, the proposed amendment. So, and it has to happen before the date of the General Assembly. There won't be a General Assembly in next July or June, but by that date, if there was one, a year from this present assembly, presbyteries have to vote. And we will know whether it passed and it will become an amendment to the Constitution if and when a majority of the presbyteries have voted yes. And that'll be publicized a lot. And sometimes presbyteries try and jockey to be the one that passes or the one that defeats or whatever. But it'll have to be approved by a majority of the presbyteries before it becomes a amendment to, or before it's added to the Constitution. And we will know within a year. Yes. Well, Constitution has two parts. Number one is the Book of Confessions. That's considered part one of our Constitution, and part two of our Constitution is the Book of Order. But we will know before the end of 25. Yeah, this one is in effect through December 25. And the next one will go in effect January 26. So the next one will be 26, 27. So there won't be a lag time. It'll go into effect. The book of order won't change until sometime in the fall or winter of 25. Right? Right?
Yes, sounds correct.
What was the first part? Right. AC already talked about the so-called Olympia overture, which is concerned by a lot of the church. It had to do with the inclusion of transgender and gender identity issues. And it actually has two parts, which is, I don't think the church understands, the general church understands. Part one had to do with membership. We have reaffirmed that anybody that believes in Jesus Christ can be a member of the church. And that wording originally used discrimination, but I think they took that word out. But it assures that anybody that believes in Jesus Christ can be a member of our church. Second part had to do with leadership, ordination. And I was telling AC, what my hope was that we welcome anybody, but I want room for everybody in our church. And I was considered most of my career to be left of center. And we were begging for the church to leave room for us to stay when we were young and radical and all that kind of stuff. We were begging for the church to allow us room to stay. Well, now the right of center is trying to find a way to stay. And so I don't see how we could have begged for a way to stay and not leave room for others to stay. And I think the amended version, and you can speak on that, AC, left room because it lifted up the other principles having to do with God alone is Lord of the conscience, and basically presbyteries determine who's suitable to be ordained as teaching elders. So a presbytery will react to those issues the way that presbytery will, and sessions are the only body who determine who's suitable to be ordained as a ruling elder. And so whatever session decides. So I think in my mind, there's room for everybody in there.
And so that amendment from the Olympia Overture, which was Polity 01, that spent a lot of time in amendment because we were trying to find the right language to be as inclusive as we wanted to be, but not be so inclusive that we were exclusive of other people and other beliefs. And so we were trying to find a way to say everything we wanted to say without trying to alienate people by saying the things we wanted to say. So it kind of went back and forth on that a lot of the time. And it felt like a lot of the overtures that were discussed the most were discussed in their amendment and how our congregations and our presbyteries would receive them rather than what we believed. There weren't a ton of overtures that went through that were a 1-vote margin. There were a couple that were 1-vote margins, and a lot of that, so that discussion was deciding if we were going to pass them and making up your mind. But a lot of things were just in the nitty-gritty of language and how can we express what we are feeling and thinking in this room to the rest of the church for the next 2 years.
Some others, and you may want to spend more time on that particular issue. The presbytery will be voting sometime this year, or you may not. But other issues, the Board of Pensions has changed the benefit plan for your staff, whether they be ordained clerk, teaching elder, or on the church staff. And it's a big, big change, and we don't have time to go into it. The Board of Pensions is an agency that we can't tell them what to do. They have a fiduciary responsibility, and we can't tell them what to do. So the Assembly has asked the Board of Pensions to do some more exploration on the dues and the benefits plan. And they have been really good. I'm a fan of the Board of Pensions in general, but I think they will. What were some of the other issues? Divestment issues from fossil fuels. That was an interesting thing. One morning it passed, full divestment passed by one vote.
Yes.
And after lunch, there was a motion to reconsider. It was reconsidered, and it was amended and talked about and came to a different place. Basically, if you divest, you don't have any place at the table with the corporations. Stockholders get to engage with the corporation, but the way it was left, in my understanding, was that you work for a fossil-free future and stay at the table with the corporations and work with them.
Yeah, we essentially, the environmental committee had two bills going to the floor, and the first was just complete divestment without looking back. We're not going to keep engaging with these companies. And the second that we brought to the floor was, we would like to be on the road to divestment, but we want to keep a seat at the table, and we want to be able to voice our opinions and voice the church's opinions and work towards this, but not immediately lose relationships and break those bonds that have been there for so long. And so when the first bill passed in the morning for divestment, the afternoon, we introduced the second one, and they're a bit contradictory. In committee, we kind of never thought that the first one would pass, and so we never really saw a place in which both would come together and we'd have to deal with both. And then when it did pass, we were like, great, it passed, but now we're going to have to figure out the rest of the day. And so when that was introduced to everyone else on the floor, they realized that they can't really exist together, because we'd said we're going to divest and not talk to these companies anymore. And the second one said, let's keep talking to them. So once that second one had been introduced, that's when someone made a motion to reconsider the first one from the mornings, and we amended it and ended up in kind of a place of, we're going to stay at the table for now. We're going to pull back some of the money, but not all of it. And by the next General Assembly, we will have probably a better motion to carry forward.
Yeah, and that impacted the budgeting process this year. You may have never realized there's two places in Louisville, Kentucky, two agencies in Louisville, Kentucky that we call the leaders of our church, our mission. And, you know, the stated clerk's office is the office of the General Assembly, and the stated clerk is the leader of that office. Presbyterian Mission Agency is another agency of the church, and that's where world missions, domestic missions, PDA, all kinds of programming goes on. And they would deny it, but I think there's some struggle for who's in charge and who's more important and all that. And, you know, you have one office here, right? I mean, and the clerk of session and the pastor figure out a way to work together and all. And so we never knew that all this was going on in Louisville, but there is a plan to merge. And so budgeting this year, everything that the Assembly added to the budget went into the per capita budget because of this pending merge. And that will shock people when they see the General Assembly per capita. It went up $1 or something.
I think it went up 82 cents.
Huh?
82 cents is what it went up for 25.
I have a hearing issue.
I think it went up 82 cents.
82 cents. Okay. And then the per capita budget went up for other reasons.
Yeah.
So it'll go up to $10 and something, I think, this year. And or this coming year, and then 11 something the next year for General Assembly's portion. Synod has another portion to add into that, and I don't know if the Presbytery does or not. I'm just a short-term guy. I hadn't had to worry about it. I hope to be gone before the budget is argued. But yeah, there's a merge. It's a major issue for the two agencies in Louisville, but I'm hoping it's good for us because we don't have to figure out who to call.
Mhm. Yeah. So Catherine Handy Smith, who was in Nashville for about 10 years, a couple years ago, was a member at Westminster. And she now is back at Duke Divinity and is, I don't know what her exact title is at Duke, but she is in a place of power at Duke, which is great. And so I ran into her on Saturday night, and I did not know a single person going into General Assembly. So it was great to see a familiar face, but I was kind of like, what are you doing here? Why are you here? And so all 5 Presbyterian seminaries have elected new presidents this year. Their inaugurations are all happening this fall, and so there will be new leadership at each of the 5 Presbyterian seminaries. Because they need a voice on the floor, we have to we kind of confirm their election. So one of the bills we did was, yes, you can all go be president of your seminaries. But they need a voice on the floor. And because they are all the leaders of their seminaries, they're going to have pretty partial votes. And so Catherine Smith was there as an impartial leader of a seminary to say this is how it's going to affect the seminaries, but it wasn't going to directly affect her and Duke Divinity. And so a couple of times when we were discussing bills and how they would affect seminaries' roles in ordination or seminaries' roles in educating or funding and things like that, she was a resource person that we could call upon to answer questions. And so she was there as an impartial vote and an impartial voice, but speaking on behalf of the seminaries. There we go. Yeah. Yeah. And so she's done this at a couple of General Assemblies. This was her last one in the term that she's currently in, but it might have been her 3rd or 4th that she was at. So.
Donovan wants us to get through here. I don't think that, I think that's
Did
true.
not say that,
I think that's true.
but it's correct.
Right. All right. What? Right. Right. The seminary world is much different now than when I was in seminary. And student body is much different. Very ecumenical student body in many places, and faculty as well. I was on the board of Louisville Seminary for a while, and the last time I was on, out of a graduating class of 35 or 40, there were 9 Presbyterian students that plan to go into parish ministry. And I thought, wow, that's an awful big budget for 9 pastors. I've been to somewhere between 30 and 40 assemblies. Right now it's very different because of COVID. They went to virtual stuff, but in the beginning I went as a young youth minister because everybody went to the PCUS assembly. It was a family reunion, and we had seminary professors that we hung out with, and Everybody. I mean, it's part of your nurturing in the Southern church. So it was a family reunion. Now it's, excuse me. Now I'm far more aware. I'm sure it was there then, a lot of political action going on, and I'm sure it was then. I just was thrilled to be part of the family at the time. So, but electronics in it too. You used to have to carry one of those luggage hand trucks, that folded up and put in an overbin with all the papers that they would send you before you got to assembly that you were supposed to study and carry around with you the whole assembly. Now everything's on in the cloud. It's much easier. Right. They've been everywhere. Courts, governing bodies, and there's 4. Now we call them councils. And it really messed up everybody that had a council, like Presbytery Council and Synod Council now. But the session, the Presbytery, the Synod, and the General Assembly are the 4 councils of the church. And those have authority. They have defined authority. They have jurisdiction over certain parts of our life, and the other councils can't take it away from them. Like in the session determines a lot of things that on their own, who's ordained as an elder, and budget issues and membership and things like that. But anyway, we call them councils. I often fall back into old language of governing body or something like that, but yeah, there's been discussion since I was a kid. It's our synod, long before I became the synod exec, was popular with our presbyteries. It was a family reunion as well, where seminary professors and everybody came that were within the synod, and it was just a reunion. Costs they're talking about for a lot of reasons, whether synods is needed. And the thing that has kept synods in place is presbyteries want a court of appeals before you get to General Assembly. And so right. The way I describe, of course, I'm biased. I said I was a child of the Southern Church. We've been wrong, but this is what we believe. We think that the PCUS was a trickle-up economy, and UPUSA was a trickle-down economy. And authority came down. Now, you got to understand, a lot of the country were not states, and they were mission fields. And so General Assembly sent missionaries out, synod execs, to form presbyteries and pay those presbytery exec salaries. And those presbyteries then found Presbyterians to form congregations because it was a mission field. And so you got to be fair about it, that there was a transition in much of the UPUSA from mission to statehood and part of the denomination. But yeah, presbytery execs had to do what the synod said.
Not really. There's not really time for people to, like, for a whole presbytery or a synod to get up and speak about what they think. But a lot of times the bills are coming from specific synods and specific presbyteries. And so they might not have more weight, but they might just be more populous. Like there might just be more bills coming from Olympia or from other presbyteries. And so we could see that in on our computers. We could see the whole docket of the day and the overture that was at hand, and you could see the origins of it. And so you could see the committee it came from and the presbytery it came from and the presbyteries that supported it. And so there were some names that just kind of kept coming back up. And I think that might be just kind of their own, for lack of a better word, relentlessness in their bills and how much they wanted things to pass. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And part of that was, it's just if your presbytery passes an overture late in the time frame, then other presbyteries might not meet in time to sign on to it and things like that. But yeah, my understanding is that in the future, an overture doesn't need to be, what's the word we use? It's concurred with by another presbytery. That's my understanding. All right, it's 10:30. I don't know what time your church starts.
Oh, one more from Chris Sheridan. Yeah, me personally as a yad for sure. Well, aside from all of the business, each morning we had worship, and so different musicians would come in from congregations around Utah, which was fun. And so sometimes it was more traditional. Someone would go up and play an organ. Sometimes there was a guitar. Sometimes there was a whole band on stage. And so that was fun to kind of see the different ways in which our own congregation or our own denomination worships, and that was fun. And then also our co-moderators that we elected were just so fun and could sense when there was tension or just tiredness in the room. And so when we'd have a bathroom break or a dinner break, they'd say, hey, if you come back a few minutes early, maybe we'll do the electric slide up front. And so one night there was, we'd been working on a bill for a long time, and it was like 8:30 and everyone was tired and we still had a lot to do that night. And Cece said, we're going to have a bathroom break, but if you stay in here, we're going to do the electric slide. And so everyone came up to the front of the room and did the electric slide together. And it was things like that where we were so tense and all had such different beliefs and were so a little bit stressed about what was going on, but we could kind of remove ourselves for a second and have some fun together, and make sure that we were enjoying our time together. So things like that were fun. And those kind of happened throughout the week in the plenary sessions with just other young adults that I met. I had dinner one night with the rest of the commissioners from Middle Tennessee, and that was great. We got to just kind of hang out together at dinner one night before we had to get back to our next session of plenary. But it was good. It was positive. Environmental and climate justice. Donovan? Oh. I'm so glad you asked. I meant to say that in church this morning and I forgot to say it. My biggest takeaway is that I learned so much about so many different congregations and how lucky we are as a congregation to be where we are. Not only in our location and in the building and all the resources we have, but the people we have. We are all we love this church a lot, I think, from what I can tell. And we are so lucky to have at least even one pastor. There are some pastors there are some congregations in Middle Tennessee that don't even have one. And so there are things like that where we were going through bills and overtures that were not going to affect Westminster that much. Things that might sway us in some way, but our church was still going to stay standing. And there were people sitting down the road from me that were like, if this passes, my congregation might go under. And so things like that where I was kind of just like, wow, we're very lucky to be where we are and surrounded by the people we have, and just in this beautiful place. So I'm just more grateful overall. Thank you.
That could be good or
No.
bad.
Right, I don't know if that's.
I think y'all did a great job in fulfilling your vow at her baptism and raising her in the faith. Don't you think? I have one more thing. She mentioned that stated clerk took all the people there from Middle Tennessee out to dinner. I told her to and go to a nice place. So if you know anybody on the finance committee, when the bill comes, we got to find a way to pay for it. Okay. All right.
Thank you both so very much.
Of course.
Service and AC for representing us so well. We're really grateful. And I know it was kind of a stressful time getting out there and the week coming up, and your poise and commitment is wonderful. Thank you. Let's close with prayer. God of grace and mercy, we thank you for this church, for the denomination, and we pray for its health and that it would continue to live out its unique responsibility of being the Reformed voice in our country. We pray for the new moderators, that they undergo their work, that they would represent the church well and wisely and with winsome love in these next 2 years. As these bills and overtures work through the presbyteries, may our debate be sensible and wise and allow us to discern the Spirit's movement as we seek to be faithful in your call on us in this time and place. Grant us vision for a future and courage and joy as we seek to lean into it. For it's in Christ we pray. Amen. Thank you all.